the guardianship of their parent or an adult, are you telling me that a child, whether you argue that being 18, 16, whatever it may be, you're telling me that that's actually okay? And I'm not saying that we can go back 200 years and say, we can't retrospectively go back culturally say...
let's take a bit of the heat out of the situation. Instead of talking about paedophilia, let's talk about child labour, right? It's a bit more, a bit easier to talk to without things being slung around and misconceptions.
Well, actually, I do want to go back to paedophilia in a minute, actually, because for one reason, because it's something quite topical, which has already happened with Telford, which is again another ring, sex ring.
But let's come back. We'll come back. My point is, let's look at it in the context of child labour. There are countries which still legally allow child labour. They're slowly outlawing it more and more as cultural awareness picks up and the internet spreads sort of scientific information about what is good for humans and what's bad for humans. But it was maybe up until a few years ago. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the age of consent in some European countries is still below 16, isn't it? 16 in this country.
If Emmanuel Macron's wife lived in the UK, she would be in prison, and she'd be on the sex offenders register now.
And he'd be getting a pat on the back.
Exactly.
I think you need to be careful between the word. Look, if there was a guy who was 12 years of age in Britain. This is going back now 7-8 years. He invented this little scooter thing. He made an absolute fortune. Yeah. So in that case, he's making it himself. He's under 16, under 18. Yeah. He's become a millionaire. Child labour entrepreneur. Yeah. Child labour entrepreneur.
Well, this is my point. I mean, there's 2 points. One is, looking at it in the context of child labour, it is situation. It's very situational based. Is the child in India? A lot of children's prospects, being from the village, improve when they go to the city, which, by the way, exposes them to a great deal of risk. So they go to the city to earn money, and they send the money back home to the village because there's more economic prosperity in the cities. And if you're faced with that, or a life of working in poverty in a farm, having a very limited economic outlook for your future, then they take those risks in order to improve their situation. I'm not saying it's right, but my point is that given the option, we have to look at extreme cases, because that's when you understand where the context of right and wrong.
But do you think life is about risk? I mean, let's face it. I mean, the Mayflower, the Mayflower set sail to the New World, and that was a risk. Many people died along the way. That's how people fought in wars.
Forward as a society. I mean, looking at the context, if you look at a country like India, I mean, I grew up and we had servants in India. We had them. I grew up with them.
Hold on a minute. You are talking about a cultural thing, which I'm not disrespecting what you're saying. I'm talking about the UK, a developed European, controversial word, European country, where we think we moved on, whether it be morally or legally. We think we moved on and we are now better, more developed, we're more reasonable, we're more socially intelligent. However, and I'm sorry to say, to me it hits the heartstrings, pedophilia, which in 200 years ago would be, I wouldn't like to use the word acceptable, would be not frowned upon as it is today.
It was the norm.
But today we pretend to be in a modern society with the rule of law, with the difference, we know the difference between right and wrong. Yet here we are, we're giving pedophiles 15, 20 years in prison with the full amenities, 3 meals a day, TV.
I get you. That's quite controversial.
I'm sorry, but then again, the guy who robs Baring's Bank and takes 600 million quid, he gets 15 years, 3 meals a day. Well, hang on a minute. Law, opinion, right or wrong? I think we've got it wrong.
Hold on. Firstly, I know someone who was briefly in prison until his trial came up, and it's not. I wouldn't like to make out that it's that comfortable.
Hold on a second, Theo. Did you not vet this guy before we brought him onto the show?
Yeah, my prison friends. It's not as comfortable as you make out, but I'm not saying that. But it costs to maintain people in prison. It is the cost of the taxpayer. There's no doubt about that.
Actually, that brings an important question, because I did want to talk about pedophilia, the thing, particularly like Rotherham, I think it was, where the sex ring was, and I think there was a case where the police went into this house and they saw this 13-year-old girl who was extremely drunk and several half-naked Pakistani British men in there, and the police arrested the girl. and left the men alone.
Wow.
And that was the whole thing that started this whole. We need to look at the pattern, and there were so many people who were looking to avoid the fact that they were Asian, and no problem with that. But I want to, and I'll just throw that one in there. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, because Theo and I have argued over this on numerous occasions, is because I believe in capital punishment. I still believe in the death penalty.
So do I.
And he says, well, in the States, he gave me some statistics on, what were the statistics?
1 in 9 people on death row are found to have an unsafe conviction.
Okay, so unsafe conviction.
Unsafe conviction.
Okay, so
Let off.
We have now, we're going back now 30 years, and I'm watching this on Discovery Channel, we're going back 30 years and reinvestigating cases in the 80s and using DNA to actually convict them, if they're still alive, and sentence them 30 years later.
But some of these convictions are for sexual assault.
yes.
Right, see, this is
But
a different thing.
my point on that is very, very, very black and white. If you do not have 100% categorical evidence, you cannot put somebody on the election.
Have we just decided that the law is intrinsically unreliable, but we have to live by it because it's the only mode of control in Western society? And therefore, if it's unreliable, how can you apply capital punishment, which is an absolute outcome?
Okay, here, and I know that Yogi wants to jump in on this one. You look at someone like Ian Brady, who spent the best part of how many years? 40, 50 years in prison, at the cost of probably, I think it was probably about anything between 150 and 250,000 a year. Now, if you think the amount of money it's cost to keep him alive, and how that money could have been invested on people who are actually genuinely suffering in this world. And,
I put them all in community service, not in prison.
Because for him to be in prison for life, with categorically no other reason.
How does it cost 250,000 a year?
Well, that's how it cost. Those are.
I think it's because he's in a high security prison and needs special confinement.
Same with Peter Sutcliffe. How much it costs him to keep him alive?
The prison costs a lot of money to employ the prison guards. It costs a lot of money.
And the supervision and things like that. So yeah, I do believe in capital punishment, and here's why I believe more so now than any time before. If you can go on Google and you can look in someone's back garden, we can pretty much, from DNA and technology the way it is, we can probably place anyone anywhere at any particular time. All right? And even though they say we can't, we pretty much know we can. So to be able to locate someone in a certain place can accurately be done, probably 99.9%.
Yeah. Or you can just simply say, we have a very severe penalty for a crime. And look at Saudi Arabia. People have their hands chopped off for stealing, and you can bet your life that stealing is not as common there as it is here.
Yes. Okay. So it is a mishmash. That's aptly titled today. I'll start from the most recent and go back. Well, the issue is what that person could achieve in a very small fraction of time. It only takes a few seconds to commit a fatal crime. So their idea is, I guess, that they're less risk to society and less of a cost to society by being in prison rather than being out, which is a bit of a perverse concept if you think about spending to now make sure you're less of a risk. Then there's a principle of rehabilitation, which even though it's we can say that there's some people that are beyond it, there is a sort of desire that everyone deserves a chance at rehabilitation. That's why kind of mens rea is important, and people where there's a clear intention of a crime are treated more harshly than those that are like manslaughter versus murder, basically. It's a big
because actually, so I want to bring the two together between the whole paedophilia thing or paedophiles.
Can I say one point on that? So let's be very clear. Paedophilia is wrong, but why related to child labour is because at the age of 21, my father was already the head of the family. He was already travelling internationally. I'm talking about 50 years ago. He was already taking on the full responsibilities that I, at the ripe age of 38, am just embarking upon. He had, by 28, he had 3 kids. So my point is that people were maturing a lot quicker. People's responsibilities were being dropped on them a lot quicker, and they were being asked more of. I imagine a boy in the caveman era would be expected to start hunting by the time he hits 13 or 14, join the hunting.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the caveman era
now.
Yes,
it is wrong now. So that explains the context of why it's wrong.
Of course, the context is now. I'm not going to go back over history.
Yes.
We'll be here until Christmas.
We need to have an explanation as to why it's wrong, and then look at it. It's wrong for whom? It's wrong for society. Do you know that a lot of children who are abused as paedophiles end up becoming paedophiles?
I did not know that. No,
it's true. It's a very, very common cycle of abuse that occurs. And so we need to break this cycle.
Okay, but look. There's an opinion and there's law. So you're telling me in the baby P's case, when this child, this poor young boy, was 18 months old, was abused, yes, and we are in a very allegedly the fourth richest country, whatever it is in the world, loads of money. I live in the Czech Republic, and it has a tenth of the UK. Yeah. However, that was again like mental issues, like paedophilia, brushed under the carpet. We get a bit of sellotape out. It'll be fine. It'll go away in a year or so. The media won't focus on it because the media is all but the rule of the country. But then again, we still have these issues. They haven't been dealt with for at least a generation. But then we are in a very developed, civilized society. Yet these things are still happening.
Actually, Yogi, let me ask you a question. So, in terms of you say the people who got abused, then they become the abusers. So, what do you do? I mean, do you see them as a victim, or do you see them as an abuser?
Well, as if you believe in capital punishment, then they would never have a chance. They are both. They are victims who have now become.
Well, I'm not saying I'm not.
Who is violent, who has not had violence.
I'm not. Look, I'm not saying a paedophile. I'm not saying a paedophile should be murdered. Should be killed. But I do believe in chemical castration for paedophiles.
Yeah.
And even if, because the thing is, sometimes some of them or I've seen on television things like that who've been interviewed and says, actually, I can't control the urge, and as much as they probably hate themselves for it, they know they've got a problem, just like a problem who has a problem with alcohol or anything else like that.
Yeah.
However, if that's the case, on a preventative measure, you can talk about chemical castration.
I had a patient who was a paedophile, and he actually presented to me in a panic because he had various images on his computer, and the builder had apparently removed his computer and was making noises of blackmail. And so this is how he came to see me. And he somehow he got his computer back, but the upshot was that this gentleman knew he had total self-awareness. He knew he was a paedophile. He understood that it was not acceptable to society, and he never ever acted on it. He knew it was not acceptable in society, and he never acted on it. He never intended to act on it. In fact, he even told me that sometimes he stopped himself going to certain social situations because his motivation was wrong. So I understand, Andy, what you say about some people saying, I can't help it, because then they do need some kind of chemical castration. Yeah. Whereas this gentleman, there's nothing wrong with him. And I'll tell you this, you can have any kind of combination of sexual affiliation, which is normal for you. Okay, it doesn't mean it's acceptable to society. So I used to work in the gender identity clinic, and I'm telling you, you can have anything. It doesn't, anything. So all these guys who say I'm trans this, trans that, some of them are probably right. I mean, obviously some of them have psychological issues, but some of them are 100% right. And there are probably people who are biological paedophiles, but if they choose to live in a society where it is unacceptable, then they know they can't act on it, and neither should they.
I think there's a couple of things we need to talk about or consider. One is society has opened up a hell of a lot over the last 30 years. People coming out in regards to their sexuality in general. What you would have talked about 10 years ago about transgender is now we can open a conversation in a Costa coffee.
A permissive society and free speech is a complete disaster.
It is, but my point is back to many of your podcasts, and the one that I was very privileged to be part of, the political correctness. I love going back to political correctness. I can talk about that all bloody day long. The point is, we have become too politically correct as regards to right and wrong, whether that be how society is governed through the religion of the country